Finally, in 1923, after an official death toll of more than 24 Osage, the Osage Tribal Council issued a resolution pleading and demanding for federal authorities untainted by corruption to intervene. And it was then that the case was taken up by a rather obscure branch of the Justice Department, one that certainly will not seem very obscure on this day in particular. It was then known as the Bureau of Investigation, and it would later be renamed the FBI. And I think it's somewhat fitting to this day to talk a little bit about the Bureau, because I think it's probably in a lot of people's minds. And the Bureau back then was really a ragtag operation. It had only a smattering of agents. They were not authorized to carry guns. If they wanted to arrest somebody, they had to get a local lawman to make the arrest. And they had very limited jurisdiction over crimes, but they had jurisdiction over American Indian reservations. And so that is why the Osage murders became one of the FBI's first major homicide cases. And in 1925, the new boss man, J. Edgar Hoover, summoned this man, Tom White, to Washington. He said he needed to see him right away. Now, Tom White is also a remarkable man, and in many ways he's like Molly. He reflects and embodies the transformation of the country. He was born in a cabin in Texas on the frontier. He was from essentially a tribe of lawmen. His father was a sheriff. He grew up, he saw people being hung, criminals being hung. He became a Texas Ranger, as did many of his brothers. He practiced law riding on a horse with a pearl handle gun at a time when justice was often meted out with a smoking barrel of a gun. And by the 1920s, 1925, when Hoover suddenly summons him to Washington, he has to wear a suit. He's got to learn to adapt techniques like fingerprinting. Handwriting analysis would become an important part of this case. He has to file paperwork, which he can't stand. And when he gets to the Bureau, he doesn't know why Hoover has summoned him. But Hoover at the time was replacing many of the old frontier lawmen with a new breed of agent, these college boys who typed faster than they shot. And the old timers like White would mock them as Boy Scouts. And in fact, they had very little criminal experience. And so Hoover had kept on the rolls just a few frontier lawmen like White, and they were known as the Cowboys. And this is actually a picture of Hoover taken just a few months before White saw him. So this is exactly what Hoover looked like at his desk. He was only 29 years old at the time when he became director. He was not yet an autocratic or had all the autocratic power that he would have over the next several decades. He was new to his job, and he was still insecure about his power. And the funny thing about Hoover was he hated taller agents. So taller agents hated to be summoned to headquarters because they were afraid if he saw that they were tall, he might fire them. And Hoover also kept a dais behind his desk so he could stand on it, so he would seem taller. So White, when he summoned White, White stood 6'4". What's more, even though he had on his new suit that he was supposed to wear, he was defiantly wearing a cowboy hat, which violated all new protocol. Here he was looming over Hoover, and Hoover begins to tell him about the Osage murder cases. And the Bureau had actually been, at that time, working on the case for 2 years, and the results had been completely disastrous. Not only had agents failed to make any arrests during that time, they had gotten an outlaw, a guy named Blackie Thompson, out of prison. They assured state authorities, don't worry about it, we got this covered, we're going to use him as an informant. Well, shortly after he got out of prison, he slipped their tail, robbed the bank, and killed the police officer. Now, Blackie would later meet his own unfortunate fate after he tried to escape from prison and was gunned down. But Hoover, again, hard to believe, was insecure about his power back then. And he feared a scandal could end his dreams of building a bureaucratic empire. The Bureau had just been entangled in the Teapot Dome scandal, which was another oil corruption scandal involving kickbacks, bribes, cover-ups, destructions of evidence. And he feared that if there was another scandal, he might be ousted. And so when White gets there, he realizes he has not been summoned to be fired or purged. Hoover has in fact summoned him to save his own tail. He needs one of the cowboys, one of the experienced frontier lawmen, to help try to take over the Osage case. And White realizes, given the danger, that the only way to try to crack the case is to put together an undercover team. And he recruits several of the old frontier lawmen from the cowboys. Here's a picture of one of them. A descendant gave me this photograph. Most interestingly, he recruited an American Indian agent. And at least to my knowledge, there were no statistics then, but I think it's fair to say that he was the only American Indian agent in Hoover's bureau at the time. And they go in undercover. They infiltrated the region. They posed as cattlemen. One posed as an insurance salesman, and according to the records, actually sold insurance policies. I have no idea what happened to them. The investigation, they have to learn these techniques which I discussed, like fingerprinting and handwriting analysis. In many ways, the case marks and tracks the evolution of law enforcement, and most importantly, the kind of professionalism or the professionalizing of law enforcement. And the case has many twists and turns, and in many ways, it resembled less a criminal investigation than an espionage case. There were moles, there were double agents, there was possibly a triple agent. It was impossible to know who to trust in power, who was conspiring against you. The agents were followed and tailed. The reports were leaked. They carried guns, even though they were not authorized to because of the danger. And I won't reveal all the ins and outs of the investigation because I think it is more powerful to read about it in context because it is very multi-layered, very Baroque in many ways. But ultimately, what the agents do is follow the money. And the money leads them they try to track to see who is profiting from these crimes. And in particular, who is profiting from the murders of Molly Burkhart and of Molly Burkhart's family members. And it leads them to a very prominent white settler. And what's more, this settler turns out to be somebody who Molly trusted and whom many of the Osage trusted. And one of the things that made these crimes so sinister was that to steal the Osage oil money, it involved these deeply calculating plots that often unfolded over years and involved people pretending to love you, pretending to be intimate with you, while all the time plotting and scheming and conspiring to kill you and your family members. I, in my own ways, could not find the words to quite capture the level of this deception. But there's a quote from Shakespeare, from Julius Caesar, which I think comes closest to this level of betrayal. It's a quote from Julius Caesar where Shakespeare writes, "Where will thou find a cavern dark enough to mask thy monstrous visage? Seek none conspiracy. Hide it in smiles and affability."